Let's return to long-term memory and sets of links. More than a century ago, psychologist Hermann Ebbinghaus experimented with learning nonsense syllables. He found that if he studied over 3 days instead of 2, he could cut the number of repetitions needed to learn the syllables in half. Since then, experiments across subjects, levels, and countries have shown the same findings. When you space your study out over several days, you learn better with less overall effort.
Why does spacing work? Every night, your brain does some cleaning, getting rid of toes, that is, dendritic spines, that haven't been used much. At the same time, toes that have been used get strengthened. If you only study material once, important toes are more likely to be pruned away. But if you work with something over several days, your brain is able to keep reinforcing important connections while eliminating, that is, pruning, the unimportant ones. On top of all of this, entirely new neurons can also jump into the mix, adding still more neural connections. These kinds of activities can be observed using a modern technique called light microscopy. You're all budding neuroscientists now, so you can probably recognize that this is a dendrite, the long leg of a neuron. And here's another image of that same neuron after learning and after sleep. Wherever you see a triangle appearing, that indicates a new or an enhanced dendritic spine. This means you can create stronger sets of links if you break your learning into smaller periods of time, spaced out over several days. The strengthening you get during sleep enhances the learning you've done each day.
Exercise can also speed up your learning because it helps your brain produce BDNF, a protein that works as a kind of fertilizer, helping your neurons grow more and stronger toes. This in turn makes it easier for the neurons to connect. Exercise produces other substances that also boost learning. We don't know what type of exercise benefits learning most, but regular exercise is the best. In one study, 20 minutes of interval training 3 times per week led to 10% improvement in memory. At least 30 minutes of moderate intensity exercise 5 days per week is recommended by many health organizations worldwide.
Let's look at how sets of links connect to one another. When you learn a chord on the guitar, you form a single set of links. But when you learn to play an entire song that includes that chord, you form a much larger web of sets of links. The same logic applies when you learn a simple fact. For example, that Germany invaded Poland on September 1st, 1939. You start that by forming a small set of links for that fact.
But when you connect that single fact to what you know about the Second World War, that set of links becomes part of a much larger intertwined web of links. When you not only know a certain idea, but also can see it in a larger context, how it compares and contrasts to other similar ideas, that's when you build deep understanding. And for any set of links, the more other set of links you connect it to, the stickier your new learning becomes. Part of the reason for this stickiness is that it's easier to remember something when you have several paths to reach any given set of links. So when you learn a new idea, the more you can connect it to things you already know, the better you will learn it. For example, let's say you learn about the law of diminishing marginal utility in economics. This law says that the pleasure you get from consuming items diminishes the more items you consume. It can be smart to pause to connect this to personal experience. For example, that the first piece of chocolate tastes much better than the 10th piece. Unless you're like Barb. By connecting this seemingly esoteric idea of diminishing marginal utility to eating chocolate, you've already connected the concept to another solid and well-known set of links.
There are 2 other ways you can use to capitalize on prior knowledge: associations and metaphors. When you're learning a new idea and you think, this reminds me of, you've just formed an association. Let's say you're learning the Chinese character for person, Ren, which I'm mispronouncing terribly, but the character itself can be easily forgotten again. But if you try to associate it with something you already know, it'll stick better. For example, you can see the similarities between the character and a human stick figure with 2 legs at the bottom, and then you can just imagine it walking away with those 2 legs.
A metaphor is when you take a phenomenon you already know and use it to help you better understand what you're learning. You may have noticed we've used a lot of metaphors in this course. For example, we have used sets of links as a metaphor for how neurons connect, tiny drones flying over a maze to explain the diffuse mode, and an octopus to explain working memory. A difficult idea can seem simple if you just find the right metaphor. Good teachers and textbooks often use metaphors. For example, in biology, mitochondria are often explained as supplying energy for cells, kind of like tiny batteries.
Metaphors help you learn more quickly because you can use sets of links you've already built that are related to familiar concepts as blueprints when forming new sets of links. In neuroscience, this is related to a concept known as neural reuse theory. You'll always find some parts of your metaphor that don't apply to the new concept you're mastering. But the point isn't to find a perfect metaphor. It's just to find a metaphor that works to explain a key aspect of what you're trying to learn. Don't worry if at first it takes time to find a good metaphor or association. The time you're taking will pay off in making what you're learning easier to remember, and you'll understand it better. With practice, you'll find your ability to make metaphors or associations improving. Now it's time to head over to the discussion forum and share some of your best metaphors and associations, or check out other people's ideas. I'm Barb Oakley.
And I'm Olav Schewe. Thank you for learning to learn like a pro.